Greg's going to give us a briefing on the Minnesota energy markets and policy. And he's been doing a fantastic job with his organization. He's the executive director of Clean Energy Economy Minnesota, and it's a great nonprofit. And I just thought it would be a great opportunity to for us to learn more about what they're doing. So, Gregg, take it away, please.
Well, thank you, Doug. Okay, so I think as far as an outline for my talk this evening, so I'm going to share a little bit more about our organization, Clean Energy Economy Minnesota, or people refer to us as CEAM. And then I did want to share some slides as far as just the overall clean energy market trends, both in the US as well as in the state. And then I'm going to touch on the number of jobs that the clean energy industry is helping to create here in Minnesota specifically, and also layer in a little bit of what we have seen throughout our membership as far as how the pandemic has impacted businesses and those jobs. And then I thought I would close the presentation with some policy updates for all of you. And I think you're well aware that Minnesota legislative session is underway, and they just started. I think this is the third week now. The weeks and the days tend to run together once session starts. All kinds of action already. And I'm sure many of you have also been following today in the House Climate and Energy Committee. Representative Jamie Long introduced the 100% clean energy bill, which aims to have 100% clean electricity in the state by 2040. So it's a pretty exciting day. And then at the end, obviously happy to take some questions, etc. So if I stay on time, I should have maybe 35 minutes of remarks, and then we can leave some time to have some open discussion and questions. So does that sound good, everybody?
Yes, great.
Great.
Fantastic. All right. So who the heck is Clean Energy Economy Minnesota, and what do we do? So as an organization, we were founded in 2016, and we're an industry-led, nonpartisan, not-for-profit organization. And we are dedicated to growing and strengthening Minnesota's clean energy business ecosystem. So our mission is to provide three things: educational leadership, collaboration, and policy analysis. And we do that in order to accelerate clean energy market growth and the development of smart energy policies. In short, an easy way to think about the work that our organization does is we promote the business case for energy efficiency and clean energy. And by emphasizing the business case, we believe that we can further drive innovation and expand markets for both energy efficiency and clean energy. So I serve as our organization's executive director, and I have a team of 4 other professionals who lead our efforts that span the areas of government affairs, community relations, as well as marketing, communications, and we do a lot of digital and social media work. And we have a board of directors that is comprised, perhaps some of these folks you may know, but our board of directors is comprised of business leaders from companies such as Evergreen Energy, and they're located in downtown St. Paul. IPS Solar, one of the fastest growing companies, and certainly in the solar sector, but companies overall in the state, and they're based in Roseville. Lindgrove Ventures, Mortenson, I think you guys have heard of Mortenson, probably a Lindgrove as well. And then we have board members from Target Corporation, Train, which is an affiliate of Ingersoll Rand Corporation, as well as True North Solar. They're based in Arden Hills. We have a board member from the Technological Leadership Institute at the University of Minnesota, and he's a former executive for 30 years at Honeywell. And then we also have 2 other retired executives from Northland Securities, as well as the Schultz School of Entrepreneurship at the University of St. Thomas. So it's a pretty stellar group of leaders who guide our organization, our strategies, and they certainly keep me on track in order to efficiently and effectively deliver on our mission as an organization. So this slide shows our member companies as part of SEAM, and a number of these logos are going to be very familiar. And I think hopefully what stands out when you see this member slide is the diversity of the companies who are a part of our organization. Not only do they range in size, some are Fortune 100 and 500 companies, but they also go all the way down to the small and mid-sized companies. So all in total, we have over 40 member companies as part of SEAM currently who work in and across the various technology sectors that include energy efficiency, wind, solar, biomass, smart grid, and a whole host of other advanced energy products and services. Together, we are focused on unlocking opportunities to grow jobs and investments, as well as markets for these clean energy technologies all across the state. Some notable areas of work for our organization include the production and the release of 2 statewide annual reports, and those are going to be a few of the reports that I talk about tonight with all of you. They are referred to as the Minnesota State Energy Fact Sheet and the Clean Jobs Midwest Minnesota Report. And among a whole host of other things that our organization does throughout the year, we also are very focused at this nexus of business and policy. And I will describe a little bit more examples of the work that we do in that arena as well in just a little bit. So the Sustainable Energy in America Fact Book, as an organization, we have the good fortune of working with national partners who are also involved in advancing energy efficiency and clean energy. And among these partners are the Business Council for Sustainable Energy, or they're referred to as BCSE, as well as Bloomberg New Energy Finance, or BNEF. So over the past 8 years, BCSE and BNEF, they've worked together to produce the Sustainable Energy in America Fact Book. And this most recent edition of the Fact Book takes a close look at really what I would refer to as like remarkable changes that have occurred over the last decade, with a focus on the events that are shaping the energy marketplace. And so the 2020 report, which is the most recent report, that looks at data through the year 2019. And to summarize, I guess the takeaway from this year's fact book was that over the past decade, the US has fundamentally overhauled how it produces, delivers, and consumes energy in the form of hydrocarbons, electrons, and heat. We have seen a dramatic rise of sustainable energy in America over the past 10 years. And in the process, our economy has grown more energy efficient, more energy secure, and importantly, more carbon is now being squeezed out of the system. So we are less carbon intensive. And this is all driven by the lower costs associated with clean energy. And the US consumer has definitely been the beneficiary of this transformation of our energy system to one that is cleaner and more sustainable. So the next handful of slides, they're going to get a little bit wonky, and I'm going to keep it real high level, but I'm happy again to try and answer any questions that might come up, or if you want to save them for later, that's fine too. But I wanted to hit on a few of the, I think, what are the important top lines from the fact book report from this year. So we're going to start with, as an overview for the US, the productivity piece. And so over the last decade, I'm sorry? Oh, I thought someone maybe had a question. Over the past decade, what we've seen is our economy has had 10 consecutive years of economic growth. And so on the chart on the left, when you look at approximately 2009-ish, you'll see GDP is growing every year through the last decade. And what's actually remarkable is the fact that energy demand has expanded only a little bit over that same time period. And you can see that in the, I think it's a purple line on that same chart. And so what that tells us is that we're growing our country's GDP, and it grew to approximately 19 trillion in 2019. And that's 20% growth since the start of the decade. And over that same time, total energy use has expanded only just a little over 6%. So in other words, energy productivity in our economy, and that's the ratio of the GDP growth over energy consumed, we've grown that nearly 18% over the last decade. So this is really positive news. And in the 5 of the last 10 years, we actually saw energy use contract year on year. So the next slide, this is a real fun one. Has a lot of great info. So as we think about our mix or sources of electricity generation in this case, improving economics, certainly for natural gas as well as renewables, that's really hastened the decline of coal-fired power across the country. So as you can see, coal went from meeting 45% of the country's energy demand or electricity demand in 2010 to just 23% in 2019. So this rise of renewables, primarily in the form of large-scale, utility-scale, hydropower, wind, solar, biomass, geothermal, and waste-to-energy, that's played a critical role in cleaning up the electricity grid. And generation from these technologies jumped almost 80% in just the last decade alone. And nearly all of that new renewable generation came from large-scale wind and solar projects, along with a number of rooftop solar systems. So these results are really remarkable when you consider that as well on a capacity basis, which is the chart on the right-hand side of this slide. Our country has twice the renewable power capacity today than just 10 years ago. For example, the total installed wind capacity, we've tripled that, but with over 100 gigawatts of installed wind capacity in the US. And we're now at over 75 gigawatts of installed solar capacity. And that's 80 times more solar capacity that's online today than when we started the decade. And initially, when we first started building out these technologies, it was being spurred by a lot of state level mandates for renewables or clean energy, along with federal tax credits. But over the last several years, we've seen these projects really coming to the forefront simply on the economics alone. They are just the lowest cost forms of energy right now. So in all, almost 150 gigawatts of wind and solar has been built in the United States in the last 10 years. So the US today, we're only second to China in the total installed capacity for renewables. So this slide, I thought it would be fun to share. As technology advances are continuing to drive down costs, this has really allowed American consumers to have more control over how and what their choices are for where their energy comes from. And the control applies not to just how the power is being used in businesses and homes, but also where it's coming from. So today we have a number of regulated utilities across the country who are offering different types of programs. Sometimes they're referred to as green tariff programs, or other programs that will help to facilitate the delivery of power from where it's being generated, oftentimes to corporate users of that electricity. And I wanted to just give you a flavor for the growth that we're seeing in what's referred to as power purchase agreements. And that's essentially the contract between who's generating this renewable energy and then who, in this case, who is purchasing that energy. And I think a number of the names in the chart on the right-hand side are very familiar to all of you as well. And so we're seeing the corporate sector really be a leader and an important driver for the continued growth and also the increased demand for clean energy across the country. So as our energy system is transforming, obviously there's going to be some impacts for greenhouse gas emission reductions. And we've seen over the last decade that the greenhouse gas emissions have been reduced. And so our power plants, so the electricity sector, has dropped emissions nearly a quarter. However, on the right-hand side, you can see as emissions by sector, you can see that the progress that we've been making in the electricity sector, that sector is now the second biggest emitter behind transportation in the US. And the same is also true here in Minnesota. And I'll talk a little bit more about Minnesota in a little bit. However, sometimes it's surprising because people think of electric vehicles and this move that we're beginning to see towards electrifying transportation. Although we're still early in that kind of movement towards electrification, we're seeing that transportation sector emissions are on the rise. And so across the US over the last 10 years, they've actually risen 5%. So that is why the transportation sector is the largest sector for greenhouse gas emissions. I thought I would note as well, so just the overall top lines when it comes to the emissions story in the US. So we've seen emissions drop around 4% over the last decade. And as of the end of the year 2019, overall US emissions were down by 12% since 2005. And the reason I bring that up is I think many of you are probably familiar or have heard of the Paris Agreement, the Paris Climate Accord. So when we compare our progress through the end of 2019 to what would have then been at the time the Obama administration's commitment as part of the Paris Agreement, that means that we wouldn't even be halfway towards meeting that particular pledge that was made. And when we made the pledge as part of the Paris Agreement, that was to cut our greenhouse gas emissions between 26-28% from those 2005 levels by 2025. And so we were only down 12% through in actuals at the end of 2019. And I'm sure you all are aware that yesterday on his first day in office, President Biden did sign an executive order re-entering the US into the Paris Agreement, which was certainly welcomed by many who work in our industry, as well as by countries and many signatories across the globe. So I think to summarize, I have a number of notes I wanted to share, but I think just when we think about the greenhouse gas emission reductions and how we're doing economy-wide, again, when we take into account all segments of our economy, not just our power sector, but all segments, we're looking at emissions in 2019, they decreased by just under 3% from the year prior. Projections, the most recent projections by BNEF, Bloomberg, they're showing that the US economy is projected to have decreased emissions around 9% in 2020. And that's in comparison to 2019. So we went from just under 3% emissions in 2019 to what's projected to be around 9% emissions reductions. But obviously, a lot of that is due to the impact of the pandemic. With more workers staying home, not traveling in a car to their office, et cetera, transportation emissions will be down. And I think Bloomberg right now is projecting around a 4% decrease for transportation emissions in 2020. And then we're also seeing, again, because of just reduction in industrial activity, that will be decreased as well. And the power sector will also be down. So the important takeaway is the expected reduction in greenhouse gases in 2020. It's because of the pandemic. It is not because of specific, focused, concerted climate action. And I think that that's an important footnote for many of us. This next slide, I did want to just briefly touch on some power prices. And across the US, Bloomberg and BCSC do a really nice job in looking at how do we compare to other large nations or frankly competitors of ours. And it also, I think this is an important slide because it does a little bit of myth busting. I think oftentimes people think about, well, the more renewables that we're adding into our system, that's just increasing our costs. And really what we're seeing is because renewables are the lowest cost source of new electricity generation, and there's a whole host of other variables that go into overall costs or rates that people pay. We know that renewables is actually a key component in helping to curb big increases in rates, as well as ensuring that they continue to be affordable. And to that end, I also wanted to highlight that energy overall in the US, when we think about energy as an expenditure for households, we're seeing that with increased choice that consumers have when it comes to energy products and services, also including EVs and vehicles, this is resulting in lower prices and overall lower energy bills for US consumers. US households are now putting less than 4% of their average monthly income on a proportional basis into energy related expenses. And that's down from around 5% 10 years ago. So really, when you look at these charts, the takeaway will be all of us are spending historically the lowest amount as an overall share of our expenses on a monthly basis on energy. So I think that that is also a good news piece. On the cost side, one of the things that I thought was important to share is, I think many of you are familiar, these costs are continuing to plummet for clean energy, renewable energy sources. One of the fun facts, and Bloomberg does a nice job of kind of analyzing all of this. I wanted to highlight these learning rates. So on the right-hand side of this slide, you see onshore wind, the learning rate is 15%, solar is 29%, batteries are 18%. What that means is essentially the costs for these technologies, for every doubling of installed capacity for each of these technologies, we see a 15% reduction, for example, in wind, the 29% reduction in solar. So as we're producing more, these costs are continuing to become and are being driven lower. So it's just kind of a fun way to talk about what we're seeing when it comes to how costs are coming in for renewable electricity. So I know I ran through that fairly quickly. I'm going to move to Minnesota and talk about some specific trends that we're seeing in the market here in the state. But did anyone have a burning question? Otherwise, I'll just keep on moving forward. All right.
I have a question.
Yes.
All your members, have they switched to solar? All the companies that you have? I went to a climate conference, Nobel climate conference at Gustavus in 2019, and a lot of the companies that you had on there were also discussed, and someone said that many of them were now operating by solar panels that they had on the roofs or someplace nearby. Is that correct? The people that belong to your group are the ones that do that?
That is correct. So there are a number of organizations and companies. 3M, for example, is 100% renewable at their headquarters, and we have a whole host of companies that are a part of that. And they, as I'm sure many of you are aware, a number of our large corporations have these really ambitious but achievable goals as well, to be net zero by certain years, or to be 100% renewable, not only within their own operations, but also within some of their supply chains, et cetera. So it's a really exciting, I think, story. And I think one of the also kind of differentiators of our membership of companies is predominantly many of them are the ones that are really the folks behind developing the projects, creating the products, or providing the services. So although we do have some large energy consuming companies as part of our membership, many of them are the ones that are on the front lines innovating and creating these new products and services. So that's kind of an exciting piece. So looking at the slide, in Minnesota, I think the story continues to be very similar to what we've been seeing at the national level. And I won't spend a whole lot of time. I think it's pretty obvious as you look at the slide, what we're seeing as far as wind and solar being the cheapest forms of new electricity here in the state. But I thought I would spend just a minute making sure that folks understood when you hear the term LCOE, or the levelized cost of energy. I wanted to just kind of share a bit about that. So it's a pretty common concept that measures the lifetime costs of a particular project divided by its energy production. So it's a calculation that looks at what's the present value of the total cost to build and operate. In this case, let's call it a wind farm, a solar farm, or a natural gas plant. So what's the present value of the total cost to build and operate that over its entire lifetime? And so by using LCOE, the levelized cost of electricity, we can compare all these different types of technologies that are on the left side of the chart, because they're all going to have a little bit different lifespan, a different project size, different costs of capital that they're using to finance these projects, different risk profiles, but LCOE is one way, and it's probably the most common way to evaluate, hey, what do these costs look like all in? And this clearly shows wind and solar are continuing to be the lowest cost forms of new electricity generation in Minnesota. Similar, as we're thinking about this generation mix in the state, just a couple of highlights. So we've continued to see our electricity sector trending once again away from coal, moving more towards renewables, as well as some natural gas. And essentially on the right-hand side of this slide, you can see the build out of any new coal facilities. That's just not happening in Minnesota anymore. You're starting to see many of our utilities have either already announced or will soon be announcing the closure of the last few facilities here in Minnesota. And actually Minnesota Power, just, I believe it was last week, came out with their announcement that they will be also transitioning their coal fleet, the remaining coal fleet that they have on their system. So they're moving away from coal as well. So in total, renewables have accounted for 84% of all the new generation capacity that's been added in the state since 2010. And over that same time period, we've retired about 530 megawatts of coal-fired generation. Maybe a couple other quick highlights as we think about outside of non-hydro, because a lot of our hydro that we do have comes from Manitoba right now, excluding hydroelectricity. So if we're talking about wind and solar, just to give you all a sense, we've seen just under 3.5 gigawatts built in the last 10 years. And so just over 1 gigawatt of that has been from solar, and a little over 2 gigawatts has been from wind. And we also have a smaller proportion coming from biomass and also some smaller scale hydro that's in the state. So there's a lot of numbers that I can go through, but I think that just kind of fogs the brain a little bit. So I won't dive real deep into the numbers, but I think one of the takeaways would be in 2019, we saw that new wind and solar capacity that were added into the system, that was roughly split evenly between wind and solar. And the 2 years prior to that, we actually had more new solar being built in Minnesota than we had wind energy. But in total, wind is by far and away, when you think about the 25% of renewables that comes from our electricity is coming from, over 18% of that comes from wind. 2 to 3% comes from solar. Around 2% or so comes from biomass, and the rest primarily from small hydro. So that's what our 25% renewable electricity currently, where we're at, that's the sources and where they come from. And then also in the last year, just a couple of project examples for all of you. One of the larger wind farms was commissioned and brought online in 2019, and that was the Stoneway Wind Farm in Southwest Minnesota, and that was owned by EDF Renewable Energy. And we also have seen a really innovative, one of our member companies, Joule Energy, they brought online a smaller system, but it's really novel in that it actually pairs about 2 megawatts of wind energy with just under a megawatt of solar. So it's a wind and solar hybrid. And I think that that's a really exciting development that we're going to potentially see even more of that happen. And then obviously, we're also going to continue to see more pairing of battery storage with wind and with solar projects. To talk just a bit about rooftop solar, so not the big, large utility scale solar, but the solar that you oftentimes will see on the roofs of businesses or homes, that's also continuing to grow here in Minnesota. And in 2019, for example, residential, commercial, industrial solar systems, the installed capacity was around 89 megawatts, and that was up from 69 megawatts the prior year. And then as we were just getting started with the presentation tonight, we were talking about community solar. So community solar has been extremely popular in Minnesota. We have the nation's largest community solar garden program.
Wow.
And that's pretty cool. And that is primarily, that development stems from work that Doug did, a bunch of folks have put in that really has started from the law in 2013 that enacted community solar. And we have been growing pretty significantly each year since then. And we have, I think, just under, might be a little bit over now, but around, let's call it upper 700s, 800 megawatts of community solar here in the state. So that's an exciting development. I should also note, just to go back, a lot of the conversations that our organization has as we continue to talk about this rise of renewables, it does come back to cost. People are just like, well, what's it costing ratepayers? And isn't this driving up our rates? And I wanted to just share that specific to Minnesota, we're seeing consumers, the electricity prices that consumers are paying, we have seen a gradual rise in those prices. But again, that's attributed to a whole host of factors. What goes into that is making sure that we're continuing to have transmission lines and that we have distribution lines like the poles and the wires and other infrastructure. So there's a number of factors that go into that. But on average, what we've seen is here in Minnesota, electricity prices today are essentially still in line with the national average. And that's around 10 to 11 cents per kilowatt hour. And we're also tracking pretty much in line with the region's electricity prices. So just wanted to share that.
Greg, this is Louis Asher. A couple of questions.
Yeah.
One, you said, if I understood it right, 3M is totally solar in their 3M office here in Maplewood. And my other question is, as far as nuclear, what's going to happen? It's stayed constant for the number of years now, as your graph shows. What's going to happen when they retire those? They're not going to build new ones. Are they planning to extend the life, even though it will be 60 years by the time they extended it the last time? That's the questions. Thank you.
Right. Thank you for the questions, Louis. So 3M, I'll tackle that one. So it's a little bit of a mix as far as how they're meeting their 100% renewable goal for the headquarters to be powered by renewables. So it's going to be a mix of solar. It's also going to be a mix of contracts for wind, et cetera. So they're doing kind of a portfolio approach to that. So I don't want anyone to think that it's because they have 100% of their operations at the headquarters are being offset with on-site solar. That's not the case, but it is being met through solar and a mix of other technologies. As far as the nuclear question, that's a really, really good question, Louis. I'm glad you brought it up. So we are looking, so we currently have 3 nuclear generating facilities in the state. So we have the unit in Monticello as well as the Prairie Island units. Those are planned to have their licenses expire mid-2030s. So there has been discussion primarily at the legislature and at our state's Public Utilities Commission around what's the future for those nuclear facilities. And I do expect, and I think the conversation has been, that not only for continuing to have reliable, dispatchable baseload and carbon-free energy coming from those facilities, it's likely that those licenses would get extended. Also, to help meet our carbon-free electricity goals as a state, I think it is important to think about those assets and what are we going to do with them. But I think the most likely scenario, Louis, is that we'll see those licenses get extended out. I'm not quite sure for how long, but I would expect to see that happen. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you.
Yes.
Impose upon you one last question.
Of course.
We're seeing a lot less sun than when I was a kid. Okay. I'm 50 years old if I don't count the first 20 years. I'm older if I do count them, obviously. And on a serious level, there is a lot less sun. Is there anybody taking that into account? Because there's more clouds than there used to be when I was a kid. Does anybody taking that into account as far as solar? And I'm 100% for solar and wind, by the way. So just to let you know that.
You know, Louis, I'm not as familiar with where some of the most recent studies are showing what the actual solar potential is. I know a number of our partners that we work with track that pretty closely. There are probably others on this call who may have answers. I'm thinking Doug or some others. Did anyone want to try and address that? Okay. But Louis, to that point, let me see what I can dig up, because I know that we're working with some partners that are looking at that issue, and I can always share that back with the group. I can share it back to Doug.
This is
Thank
Mark.
you very
Thank
you.
I do believe that they go and measure that every day at the University of Minnesota, but I got to agree with Louis because I've got solar in my house and I've had it on for 11 years, and last couple of years it's just been cloudier winters, but things are warmer too. So, but it is a good question.
One of the things that you guys got to consider is the fact of all those fires out west, because I think Barb's data showing the effects of the COVID epidemic showed that we had a clearer sky the last year.
Yeah.
Mine was just for 1 month, I believe, or a few weeks or something, right after the shutdown.
Well, I know that in India, it was in Delhi, it was the first time they'd seen the Himalayas since the British arrived.
Wow.
Amazing.
In fact, that on Earth Day, Los Angeles was the cleanest air of any major metropolitan city.
Oh.
So, but normally we do get the effect of the fires out west. So the last couple of years, we had the BC fires, California fires, the Oregon, Washington, Montana fires. That's just, I don't know if that's an anomaly or the new normal.
Right. Really good point.
Well, let's see. I'll keep moving here and happy to take more questions or have some conversation too. When it comes to Minnesota specifically on our progress in decarbonization in our power sector, We've seen, again, because of this move towards more renewables and less coal, for example, today as a state, we're at 49% of our total electricity coming from carbon-free resources. And at the same time, we've also seen this decline in harmful carbon emissions. And so emissions have fallen 37% since 2005 and 27% since 2010. And just from 2018 to 2019 alone, in the most recent report, we see that emissions have fallen about 14%. So just wanted to give you a flavor for that here in the state specifically. And I'm also going to talk a little bit more about where we're at in our Pollution Control Agency's most recent report that just came out last week. So it has some alarming news that I'm going to share with all of you. So one of the fun things to talk about, I think mostly fun, depending on who's sitting across the table from you, but electric vehicles. So we've got a whole ton of data that we look at when we're thinking about EVs, and Bloomberg and the Business Council, BCSC, they do a lot of analysis on this. And in Minnesota, I just wanted to give you a sense of where sales are trending for fully battery electric vehicles, as well as plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. And just to level set a bit, so across the country in 2019, US consumers purchased or leased a total of 320,000 EVs or plug-in hybrids. And there's now an estimated just under 1.5 million of these vehicles on the roads. Obviously, Minnesota, when you look at this chart, we're not going to be among the top states for where fully electric or plug-in hybrids have been adopted, but we have been seeing sales rise. And right now, according to Minnesota agencies, we have around 13,000 EVs or plug-in hybrid vehicles on the roads here in Minnesota. But we have seen significant increase, as you can see from the numbers on the slide. The combined sales in Minnesota for these vehicles have been around 3,800 units in both 2018 and 2019. So if you compare that to, say, California, for example, you see, because they're the leading state in adoption of these vehicles, 75,000 of those cars were sold in just the first half of the year in 2019 alone, as compared to 3,800 for the full year here in Minnesota. So I think it's really important, and I'm just going to talk a bit about it. The EV goal that the state has, we have a goal of powering 20% of all of our passenger vehicles with electricity by 2030. 20% of all vehicles with electricity by 2030. And I can share some links to some references if you'd like with Doug after this as well. But if you go to the Pollution Control Agency, Minnesota Pollution Control Agency site, one of the things I wanted to flag for folks is right now, currently in process, the Pollution Control Agency is going through what's called a rulemaking process for what is referred to as Clean Cars Minnesota. So Clean Cars Minnesota, so what that is the Pollution Control Agency is considering the adoption of rules that would require manufacturers of these battery electric, hybrid electric vehicles to deliver them to the Minnesota marketplace. And we know that that's going to result in reduced greenhouse gas emissions, other pollutants, etc. And so this rulemaking is about making sure that these vehicle manufacturers are required to deliver these vehicles and it's referred to as low emission vehicles or zero emission vehicles, that those vehicles are meeting those standards. Not to go again too much into the weeds, but sometimes as people are thinking about this new rule, and it has a lot of people's antennas up in the air because they're a little like change is always hard. It's difficult. So it's been a little bit controversial what the Clean Cars Minnesota rule looks to do from folks that they feel as though they're being told that they have to have an electric vehicle, and that's not the case. The new rule would apply to only new light and medium vehicle medium duty vehicles for sale in Minnesota. It doesn't apply to off-road vehicles or heavy duty vehicles or equipment. And it doesn't mean that SUVs, pickup trucks, that they're going to be eliminated. What it does mean is that these new rules to comply with low emission and zero emissions in Minnesota, that they would take effect January 1st in 2024. And so that means new cars that would be manufactured in 2025, the model year 2025, that those manufacturers would have to make available those vehicles in Minnesota. So from our organization's perspective, we see this as being a good thing, because not only is it going to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, because transportation is our state's largest source of greenhouse gas emissions right now, but it's going to increase and make available more choices for those types of vehicles to Minnesotans who want to buy them, own them, lease them, etc. And right now, when you go to dealers' lots, there's very few electric vehicles oftentimes, or even models that are available. And so we see this as being a good thing. It's going to be a good thing for jobs within our supply chains for companies here in Minnesota. And as we continue to build out infrastructure, charging infrastructure, we see this as being a real net benefit for Minnesota. So we're supporting the rulemaking process. But I will maybe stop with the clean cars piece, but I will just say there are opportunities for public comments as part of that process. If you go to the Pollution Control Agency site, to have your voice heard and be a part of that process. So I would encourage you to do that. There's also going to be in the coming month or two online forums that the PCA is holding to hear from people on their thoughts around this rulemaking process, to have more battery electric and hybrid electric vehicles here in Minnesota.
Greg, just a quick comment, an immediate proof of what you're saying. I recently went to a Toyota dealer and was checking on a RAV4, the new plug-in version. And he took me back to his desk and showed me a letter that they had received from Toyota saying that that vehicle will not even be in the state of Minnesota until 2024. Their sales is just really restricted. So, and there's people actually driving to the West Coast and East Coast to get that vehicle, and a few people are paying an additional $8,000 to do it. So that's not for most people, but it was really, to me, really proof that just what you're saying is those products are not getting to Minnesota.
That's right. And I think as an organization, because we are nonpartisan in our work, and as we do a ton of work with policymakers, and we're at the Capitol, we're at the Commission. But I will just say, generally, I think this rulemaking, I think it's been described inaccurately to residents at times by certain groups of people who are out there opposed to the rulemaking process. I know the Minnesota Auto Dealers Association is opposed because they are claiming that there is not demand for these types of vehicles in Minnesota, and they shouldn't be told what type of vehicles to have on their lots, and that they will lose money by doing this. And I think, again, I always try to see all points of view. I also think that there's some fear that people think that it means they have to have an electric vehicle, but you all probably are familiar with the total cost of ownership of electric vehicles for those who choose to move in that direction is oftentimes lower than your traditional internal combustion vehicle, etc. There's cost advantages as well as environmental benefits, etc. For this move towards electrification. So I think it is important for people who care about this issue to make sure that they are tracking and following this. And it's been also, I think, used as a wedge issue that we've seen at the state capitol between greater Minnesota and the metropolitan area. I think that, again, sometimes it's being described as, greater Minnesota isn't interested in these types of vehicles. We don't have any charging infrastructure, etc. There's a ton of work to make all of this happen and to help with this transition. So I just wanted to share a little bit of that. I'm editorializing a bit, maybe more than I should, but I think it's important for those that care about this issue to be a part of that process.
Can
I
I
think you're
make a
okay with
comment?
this group.
Can I make
Yeah.
a comment?
Go ahead,
quickly?
Chris.
I just with that in mind, you can imagine that there's got to be an educational effort put into that. Not only the infrastructure just suddenly appearing, but you know, building electric cars into commercials, TV commercials, you know, the stations. It's got to become more normal for people, you know, just sort of ease people into the whole thought of owning one.
No, I totally agree, Chris. I have, as I'm sure many of you on this call are as well, I have been a over the moon owner of a Chevrolet Volt since 2016, and I absolutely love it. And at the same time, you're right, anything that's new, I mean, I feel like the agency, along with a number of other nonprofit organizations, have done a tremendous job in pulling together public convenings to educate people on what's being proposed, understanding what are people's concerns, also through the Volkswagen settlement money that some of you are probably aware of. The state has put that into infrastructure, charging stations, to electrify corridors that are being traveled, connecting different regions of the state. So this is well underway. And I think from our organization's perspective, what we don't ever want to see is that we are caught flat-footed and not thinking forward, because we know that our economy is benefiting from being forward-thinking towards this transition to clean energy. And that's the work that we do day in and day out, is to make sure that we try and, again, educate folks on what's important and why this benefits Minnesota.
Right.
And I'll make sure and share that link with Doug as a follow-up to the PCA's site. Okay, I know that you all have a board meeting after this starting at 7, so I better rattle through a lot of things in a really short amount of time. My point of emphasis as far as thinking about energy efficiency. Efficiency is our cleanest and cheapest energy resource. And the more that we can squeeze out energy waste out of our system, the better. And energy efficiency is extremely cost effective. For every, it costs less to save 1 kilowatt hour of electricity, so that's 2 cents approximately, than it does to buy a kilowatt hour, and that's around 8 cents. So again, it's just a really smart economic decision, and efficiency is critical to our progress in continuing to transform our economy. These are a few of our slides that we oftentimes share with policymakers. I just wanted to give you a flavor of some of the way that we approach those conversations. Again, this is a little bit of a summary of what I talked in a little bit more detail around from the BNEF and Business Council fact book. But jobs, clean energy jobs, are continuing to grow. In fact, they're growing 2.5 times faster than jobs in all other sectors of our economy prior to the COVID pandemic. And our organization issues the Clean Energy Jobs Report for the state on an annual basis. And so some of the numbers that I'm going to show you are cited from the most recent report that we released in 2020. Energy efficiency. So as we talk about clean energy jobs, we talk about the businesses and the sectors that are our members, and that's generally how the classification codes go, federal down to state. Efficiency, wind, solar, biomass, transportation, advanced transportation jobs, clean fuels jobs, etc. In Minnesota, we have nearly 62,000 clean energy jobs, and 3/4 of those jobs are in the energy efficiency sector. So think about people professionals that are working on manufacturing Energy Star appliances, heating, ventilation, air conditioning equipment that's high efficiency, LED light bulbs, installation, maintenance, servicing. That's all energy efficiency jobs. And that is 3 out of every 4 clean energy jobs in our state reside in the energy efficiency sector. Some of our colleagues joke that energy efficiency is sort of the silent hero in this transition to clean energy, because a lot of times people don't see it, you don't talk about it. You see a wind farm, you see a solar farm, You don't really think about energy efficiency, but it's critical to us continuing to grow jobs and also benefit our economy. 37% of those 62,000 clean energy jobs in Minnesota, 37% are in greater Minnesota. So we also see that this sector has impact all across the state. And we broke this down by congressional district. But you can see actually the Southwest metro area, that's where the largest number of clean energy jobs reside. But again, it's spread pretty evenly all across the state. What we've seen, the impact of the pandemic, we've now seen that just under 14% of our workforce pre-pandemic has lost jobs. And so our industry has been affected just like all other industries with the pandemic. And this is important as we think about policies that can help not only ensure that efficiency and clean energy are a cornerstone in driving economic recovery, but it's also going to be important for those jobs. In fact, we lost the same number of jobs as what we actually had created since 2017. So it's impacted our industry pretty significantly. Programs like Paycheck Protection Program and some others have helped to provide a buoy for some of our small and medium-sized businesses in particular. But we're seeing the efficiency sector was really hit hard because of stay-at-home restrictions, people not being able to go inside homes, some businesses. So COVID has had a pretty big impact on our industry. I know it's 7 o'clock. So what I'm gonna do is, I could have spent an hour just talking about state policy. I won't do that, but I love talking about it.
Greg,
clean energy is widely supported by both parties.
Greg, you can have another 10 minutes or so. That's fine.
Okay, well, I will try and honor that and not go over, and I'll try to come in just a little less. I did want to make sure that everyone knew that Minnesota, we are unique for many reasons, and we're also unique because of our state legislature. We're the only divided legislature in the country. And as we grapple with the pandemic, as we grapple with the economic impact and downturn of the economy right now, clean energy, we don't necessarily expect clean energy to be one of the top line issues that are taken up by the legislature this year. However, we certainly hope so, that because we know, again, it's so important for providing a real engine for building back better. You oftentimes will hear that term, but we know that putting investments in today into efficiency and clean energy will pay many, many benefits as we move forward, as well as putting people to work immediately right now. So that's good for Minnesota. Just very quickly, some of the ways that we talk about clean energy with our friends on both sides of the aisle. We know that this is an issue that voters care about, and it's increasingly, even within the Republican caucus, clean energy is becoming more widely supported, and that's really important. And so we want people to not shy away from this issue. We want people to embrace it, to think about, again, from our perspective, how we talk about it. This is an economic driver for Minnesota. Just to set the stage a little bit, Governor Walz, Lieutenant Governor Flanagan, their administration, they have what's called the One Minnesota Path to Clean Energy. And it consists, and what Jamie Long, Representative Jamie Long, just introduced in the House Climate and Energy Committee today, is a part of that One Minnesota Path. And that's 100% clean electricity by the year 2040. We had a bill that was introduced in a prior session that aimed for carbon-free electricity by 2050, based on the science, based on where the progress Minnesota has made, and also where we know we can go. We feel confident that 2040 is the right year. So we're being even more ambitious with that policy proposal this year. Our Republicans who control the Minnesota Senate, so the Democrats control the House, the Republicans control the Senate here in Minnesota. They're also contemplating another portion of that clean energy, One Minnesota Path to Clean Energy, and that's called Clean Energy First. So as we are seeing utilities needing to retire or replace existing generation, what clean energy first means is that we are asking utilities they have to evaluate efficiency in clean energy first before they would move to natural gas or a fossil-based proposal for electricity generation. And so there needs to be a cost effectiveness test, off ramps for all kinds of different reasons to make sure that it's affordable, that it's reliable. But that's what Clean Energy First aims to do. And there's increasingly more Republican support in the Senate for that. So that's encouraging. And then the other two areas of the One Minnesota Path to Clean Energy that will continue to be discussed this session at the Capitol is what's called the Energy Conservation and Optimization Act, or ECO. We've been working that bill extremely hard, and that looks to expand on Minnesota's successful history in energy conservation through utility conservation programs, as well as looking at ways where you can switch to other technologies. For example, if you're in greater Minnesota, if it's cost effective, you would be able to switch your heating, let's say, from propane to a air source heat pump and have some assistance in doing that through your utility program. Our propane friends hate that. They're fighting against it. And I understand, if I were them, I understand why they are. And at the same time, it has to be cost effective for a customer, a utility customer, to do that. And they would actually have to choose to want to do that. And so that's what the ECO bill will look to do, is to provide more opportunities for energy consumers to have that choice should they choose to do it. And then lastly, the building sector. So our existing buildings, our building stock in the state, accounts for around 40% of all of our greenhouse gas emissions. We want to continue to increase the energy efficiency of our buildings. So that's another big focus of the administration, as well as what we hope will be more conversation at the legislature around ways that we can do that. And oftentimes that's in nitty-gritty things like building codes and other things, but efficiency is going to continue to be an area that we do a lot of work in. I was going to outline a little bit of our approach as an organization for how we want to support clean energy, smart clean energy policy. But again, I think I've emphasized this throughout the talk. Jobs, economy needs to be clear, time bound, and we want to continue to move forward on modernizing our electricity grid. Energy storage, new breakthrough technologies, we want to have adequate support to ensure that we can continue to bring those onto the system. Also looking at ways to further reduce greenhouse gases in our transportation sector, et cetera, is very important. So those are just a couple of quick things. I was going to talk in a lot more detail about this, but I didn't manage my time very well. So what I will say is the Pollution Control Agency, in conjunction with the Minnesota Department of Commerce, just last week, and this was in the Star Tribune, you probably saw it in NPR, a lot of news outlets covered this. We are not on track to meet our, by statute, defined targets for emission reductions economy-wide in Minnesota. And so we were supposed to have been at a 30% reduction by 2025 and an 80% carbon reduction by the year 2050. To give you a sense, since 2005 up until 2018, the most recent report just released showed that we've only decreased overall emissions economy-wide by 8%. So we are significantly behind in our, by statute, and it was agreed to in a bipartisan fashion as part of the Big Energy Act back in 2007, we're woefully behind. But I wanted to share this slide because, again, back to one of my first slides that I shared, we know we can do it. We can grow our economy and reduce emissions. So our electricity sector is leading the way. We've had the most carbon reductions in our power sector, and we've been able to do that, again, reliably, affordably, but we need to move to transportation, which is our largest emission sector in our economy. And that's then followed by agriculture, forestry, and land use. And then we get more into then our buildings. So we've got a lot of work to do, and transportation is our #1 source of carbon and greenhouse gas emissions. So I'm going to leave you with this. And thank you again for being so generous with your time. So part of what we do is we like to talk about our member success stories and how our members and how everyday Minnesotans are benefiting from this transition to clean energy. One of the ways that we do that is we do some digital work, and I wanted to share one of those short stories with all of you. And if I can share my screen like correctly, I'm going to play this 2-minute video, and that's how I will close my presentation.
I'm Nathan Dulkey, and we're out at the Solar Garden by Green Isle, Minnesota, near the town where I grew up. The day in my life can vary pretty wildly. You know, I wake up and I do chores and feed the cows and everything, and then I log on to work and I work my real job, which is in IT. And then I go out later in the afternoon and do chores again, oftentimes until the sun goes down.
I'm Dan Rogers. I lead development for Nokomis Energy. Land for Nathan is absolutely part of his family heritage, and it's something that was passed down to him. He works on it with his family to this day.
In our small communities out here, we don't have really the jobs and the tax base that, you know, the cities have. So our roads and our schools kind of end up deteriorating as a result of that. We just don't have the population to kind of support everything. One of the main reasons of doing this to help the community was just that, to bring some jobs and to revitalize things in whatever ways that we can, you know, to help ourselves and to help the community to grow and to thrive.
At the end of the day, the difference between me putting solar arrays in their field and generating electricity and them growing corn and selling that corn to an ethanol plant that then burns it and turns it into electricity is the same thing, and they can appreciate that. For farmers, it's really about being productive and doing good, and this is still in that category for them. We as a company feel we have to demonstrate trust in every aspect that we do, not just in the conversations we have with the landowner, but in the way we operate.
Proud of my council that they were able to think forwardly and allow this. I know in some cities it wouldn't be allowed. Just the improvement at school was worth a lot to the city, and what it can do for the individual subscribers too. If you can save money on your own electric bill, why wouldn't you? We're trying to be good neighbors.
Rural Minnesota is very good at taking care of themselves, and they're not complainers, but we're more into helping ourselves and doing what we can to better our situation. So if energy comes into play in that regard and it can help us out, I think that that's a good thing, and I think that we should leverage that.
Okay. Well, thank you all so much for having me, and I apologize that I didn't do a great job with time management. I had a few more slides I would have loved to share with you, and we didn't have a chance for too many questions. However, Doug, I don't know how you want to handle it, but I just really appreciate all of you inviting me, and it's great to see faces, and I'm happy to share the slide deck. I'll send that over to Doug, and he can make sure that all of you have that if you'd like it. And it has all my contact information as well as the contact information for my entire team.
Thank you, Greg. We just had one question. I see how Chris put one up. Chris, do you want to ask that question? We can't hear you.
I put my question in the chat. I'm wondering the names of those two solar hybrid plants that you mentioned, and whether or not either one of them use any storage with them.
Sure. So the plan will be for the Joule Energy wind solar hybrid. That was the first hybrid project in Minnesota. The plan is to add some batteries to that particular project. I don't believe that has been done yet. They have not been connected, but they do plan to add batteries. And that
Where is that plant?
Yeah, that is located. Let me just, it's in Pelican Rapids, Minnesota.
Pelican Rapids.
Yes. And developed and constructed by our member Jewel Energy. And are you all going to use the Zoom for the board meeting?
No, well.
Oh, we have another one. Another.
Okay. What I can do, Chris, is when I send the slide deck over to Doug, I'll include a couple of the links referencing some of the things that I had mentioned today. So the PCA stuff, I can send the link to this particular project and a couple of other items.
All right, thank you so much. It was just a great presentation.
Greg, I had a question in the chat. Would the electric car bill mandate that a certain percentage of cars sold be electric?
My understanding is there's not a specific percentage that's defined, but we do just have a goal, as I mentioned, of 20% all electric by 2030, but it's just a goal, it's not a mandate.
So it's not like the CAFE standard for gas efficiency, which basically gave away very efficient cars just to meet the standard of the others.
As I understand it, Barb, I believe that through the rulemaking process, the types of cars, so it's specific to low emission vehicles, which are sort of the cars that are out already today, all of those need to meet the CAFE standards, et cetera. And although the Trump administration tried to roll back some of that and some other things, those vehicles basically that are for sale today, that would be part of what needs to make sure for new models, they would need to be made available to Minnesota, in addition to the new fully electric or battery only vehicles.
So the battery only ones do go within the CAFE standards. So by selling a battery only one, then the company has lowered or raised the amount they can actually use in gasoline in the other cars that they sell.
I believe so, if I understand what you're saying, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Greg, I think on that same point, I'm a member of a vintage car group, and there's a lot of misrepresentation that the car standards that Minnesota are going to adopt will mean the crushing of your 63 Jaguar. And of course, they're not going to do that. However, to counteract the misinformation that is out there, do you see a need for organizations like ours to, be proactive?
I do. I think that right now the PCA and and I'm going to put into the chat the link to the Clean Cars information on the PCA site. Hopefully I can do that correctly. I'm not as savvy as Barb, so hopefully this will work. Absolutely. I think the more voices.
He is a rocket scientist.
Nice. And then I think what's also really important is to, if you're able to participate in those public forums that are now held all virtual, or just to contact your legislator and just let them know that you support the Clean Cars rulemaking. And that's really important right now. And unfortunately, it is a hyper-partisan issue at the Capitol.
Is there a published, is there anything published that like highlights the big issues related to it, what people's concerns are, that we would know that?
With that link, Chris, it will have some fairly distilled down documents that do talk about kind of the basics of what the rule is looking to do. And also, I think that there may be some public information from the past meetings where they've collected and kind of aggregated, here's the issues of concern, so to speak.
That's what I'm looking for. Yes. Okay, great.
The other thing I just want to mention to everybody is that as of today, MRES is part of Drive Electric Minnesota, which is another major advocacy group, bringing the industry together, educating Minnesotans. So we are part of another group that's going to be involved in that.
That's a great group. I'm so happy to hear that, Doug. That's an excellent group.
Excellent. Stan, did you have a question? So you got your hand up.
Well, this is a comment. I recently saw a Jay Leno episode, and he talked about the fact that he loves his older cars, but it's kind of like what's gone on with horses. They become more of a weekend pleasure thing, and the car he drives downtown LA is his Tesla. So I think bottom line, I think we're just going to see the transition swing towards electric cars, and people that once they really get into that electric car, I think that they're going to realize that they don't really care that much about their other car, but it can be something that they do on the side. I do have a question, however, regarding some of the battery storages. I've been kind of commuting with Mark Jacobson, who's the head of a group out in San Francisco, or at Stanford, well known for his famous lecture with a debate with Stuart Brand back maybe 5-6 years ago on TED.
Right.
But I've been continuing to ask him about specific storage methods like liquid metal batteries, the MRES. This is the solution from the Donald Sadoway, professor from MIT. There's a HiveView, which is a liquid gas storage technique, and so forth. And there's, of course, Tesla is coming down on their prices. Which of those storage system solutions do you think, or maybe you got some that you feel are even better for Minnesota?
Dan, I love the question. I am not a chemical engineer. I wish I was. What I can tell you is it seems as though, and I actually had some notes that I had written up that I was going to talk a little bit more about the battery side of things, because I think the simplest way to think of it is obviously wind and solar are intermittent resources, right? And for critics of renewables like wind and solar, they say that it's not reliable and that it can't, when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine all the time, right? So batteries has always been the holy grail. And we're seeing significant movement in more batteries coming onto the system to be paired and to back up these generation resources. The chemistry stand on these batteries is evolving very rapidly as well. And what I can say is I think that generally speaking, lithium ion has been what today has primarily been used for these batteries. And I believe I was told by another colleague, there's more lithium ion batteries now in the energy sector being used than there are in the consumer electronics sector, which is kind of crazy. At the same time, for all kinds of reasons, there's continued to be more research, and then people are looking at how can we get longer duration batteries, so longer than 4-hour duration in the system. I know that Great River Energy, who is generation and transmission cooperative here in Minnesota, they're the 3rd largest utility in Minnesota, essentially. They've announced an agreement with Form Energy, which is a relatively new startup on the East Coast, to deliver a battery system for a pilot project in Cambridge, Minnesota, where my understanding is that battery system will be able to have capacity to run or to discharge energy over a period of 6 days, which is, my head math isn't great, but it's over 100 hours. But what they have told publicly, Stan, is that because Form Energy's technology is proprietary, that they can't disclose anything about the technology because it's still patent pending. So I don't know what that is, or the technology specifically behind it, but it's a rush right now to see what's where that's headed.
There's also flow battery, the flow technology, the fluid.
Yes. Yep.
I don't know. It's an interesting, and I'm very sure. I'm a big fan of Robert Llewellyn in his Fully Charged program, and for years I've been watching that, and I know that there's probably 17 different ideas out there that are going to all matter.
Yep.
I think there's the more ideas, the better.
Absolutely.
Greg, thank you so much. I'll give you a shout tomorrow.
That name is.
Absolutely. And I'll email you over my presentation deck, Doug. You can feel free to share it.
Okay, thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Nice to see you all.
Yeah, thanks all.